maybe if I can ask Anders and Stephen to join us, and if I let Chris rove with the mic, and I think we're going to start at the back, yes?
Hi, question for Murray. This is Callum Chase. Murray, Jeff Hinton, who, as you will know well, is one of the founders of deep learning, so a very, very experienced AI practitioner and researcher, said recently that he thinks we will have computers with common sense within 10 years. Now, he wasn't talking about AGI, so I'm not trying to lead you into a celebrity soundbite, but a machine which would understand what would happen if you threw the table into the front row, for instance. Do you think he's right?
Well, I think he might be right, and I wouldn't rule that out. And in fact, on my timeline, I did allow for this possibility. From that would take us to 2025, right? And at 2025 onwards, I was saying, human-level AI is possible but unlikely, and that would certainly be a big step towards it. So I wouldn't be at all surprised, and I have a pretty good idea of the kinds of techniques that he wants to apply to do that. And I think there's a convincing argument for the possibility that extending deep learning, the current deep learning technology, in a particular kind of direction could lead to that. So I would definitely not. I wouldn't rule it out. No.
And Anders, I know you've looked at the timelines for artificial intelligence and deep and whole brain emulation as well. Do you have the same general views and timescales as Murray?
It's possible, but I don't think it's easy to predict. One of the most useful papers I think our institute has ever produced was looking at how good are predictions about the future of AI, and they're really amazingly bad. There is no difference between experts and amateurs, and the prediction we know we're wrong, are still having the same statistical distribution as prediction we're doing right now. So we know we can't predict human-level AI with any sense. Now, if Jeff Hinton thinks he might be getting closer to the common sense, that might be a much more specific question, and he might actually know some things. I'm still skeptical, but I think it's more reasonable. Brain emulation is nice because it's actually, you can divide it into some subparts, and you can actually work out a lot of things. There, I can very clearly say, not before 2030. Then it peaks somewhere later this century. When it comes to AI, my probability estimate is very, very wide. It's very, very flat. It's extremely hard to tell when things like that will happen.
If I could ask a question to the biologist gentleman, please. In the first part of your talk, you described cells which were very virtuous in the sense that they kept multiplying and providing you with new cells which could be used to replace faulty old cells or something. From a totally naive point of view, that sounded a little bit like cancer, almost lots of multiplication and things. Is it a bit like cancer? Do you have to be very careful to push things either in one direction or another direction, or is it a completely different thing, please?
It depends on the cells that you're talking about. If you're talking about the cells that were derived from very early human embryos, it's interesting because the gentleman asked me about telomere shortening. The opposite happens in cancer. In cancer, the cells, part of the reason why they continue to proliferate and never undergo apoptosis is because they rebuild their telomeres. And actually, the company that founded and then was founded around telomerase, which is the enzyme that makes telomeres, the reason they went after human embryonic stem cells is because human ES cells are the only natural cells that continue to have long telomeres. So they're hoping to use that as kind of a natural form of cancer compared to cancer. And there's their pharmacological program is around trying to force cancer cells to shorten their telomeres, and then they become just like any other cell. With cells that are not embryonic or what we call pluripotent, those cells rarely, if ever, have the propensity to tumor. We've probably transplanted, at least in the US, at least 100,000 patients with bone marrow derived or fat derived mesenchymal stem cells. We've never seen a tumor. So, the risk is if you put in undifferentiated human ES cells, let's say if you're transplanting pancreatic islets, and you have some residual cells that are not differentiated, there is a possibility, although unlikely, that those cells would continue to grow and form a benign tumor called a teratoma. It's not a malignant tumor. It's really just normal cells that are continuing to grow. So the risk can be mitigated, but there is a finite risk.
My question is around AI. The holy grail of AI is to develop a system which can teach itself, and then it's going to be getting smarter and smarter on a very fast level. The smartest person in the world is roughly having an IQ of 220-ish. It's hard to imagine something which has an IQ of 2 million, for example. What do you think we should do as precautions? And this is something which Elon Musk, Ray Kurzweil, and Bill Gates, people like this warn about, to make sure we are ready when the point comes.
Okay, so first of all, I think we need to be a little bit cautious about placing intelligence on this kind of scale, which we imagine extending indefinitely into very high numbers. But nevertheless, your point, I think is a very important point. Is obviously what I was talking about towards the end of the talk there, and I think that there are, as you probably know, Elon Musk himself donated $10 million for research into this kind of area, into AI safety, and I think that's a valuable investment. I think it's a good idea to get AI researchers to start thinking about how we might ensure the safety and the beneficialness of the things that we develop. However, my personal view is that it's actually premature to know what we need to do yet, because we don't actually know what human-level AI is going to be like, and we don't know which path to go down or when it comes to sort of this AI safety research. So I think the most productive thing that we can do now is raise awareness of these issues. I think that's really important, and to think about the range of scenarios that are possible without necessarily committing to one particular kind of AI that might be the one that is the winner here. So it's very important to think about it. It's very important to have a public discussion about it, an informed public discussion, as opposed to the kind of naive one that the media wants us to have. And yeah.
Can I ask a question about short-term AI? I think it was announced this week that Google have open sourced their TensorFlow development environment. How do you see that impacting the pace of change? Because previously, I mean, I guess there was things like Caffe from University of Berkeley, but here you have a massive company offering an open source development platform. How do you think that's going to impact the pace of change in short-term AI?
Yeah, so I think this is actually a very exciting development, and it's the fact that they've open sourced it is very significant, and it means that there's very likely to be, on the one hand, a very large take-up of this as a kind of set of libraries, and on the other hand, it's going to be maintained, to a kind of more professional level, because they are invested in that, whilst also having the whole of the kind of benefits of an open source community contributing to it as well. So I think it is going to help a great deal. In fact, one of the first things I did when that announcement was made was get my students to start looking at the tutorials and so on. So I think it potentially is very important. Yeah.
Same here at our institute. We're all itching at starting to use it, and around the office, our guess was that this speeds things up a bit. Not maybe an enormous amount, but it speeds things up. And well, if you also get a broader number of people involved, I think. While we might be concerned about the long-term risk, I think it's good to have a very diverse set of people thinking about how to use machine learning in interesting ways, because that way we can also be applied to new questions in good ways.
We can apply some of it in biological settings as well.
Oh, biological hacking is going on as we speak. I mean, this is particularly in the States, this is huge. You got people, basically doing, making stuff in their kitchens.
But if we can combine deep learning with biological systems.
I actually saw a really amazing demonstration of that at the Neural Network conference. So they had a reinforcement learning system, a typical machine learning thing, connected to a genetic system. So they were trying to have machine learning to learn how to control a fairly complicated genetic network to get the cells in the culture to do what they were supposed to do.
Let's take the next question.
Well, yeah, you're on that topic, really. I was wondering, given what you said about genetics and all the research you're doing, can we grow intelligence?
You mean, can we increase intelligence or grow it in a dish?
I do. Well, and all of the above,
Yeah. So I think there's definitely, and David talked about this in his opening slides, I think there is going to be a huge amount of cerebral enhancement. I mean, you know.
That's a yes.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, you know, you wear a hearing aid. You know, that's an enhancement. There are now available basically electronic eyeballs for patients who go blind early where the neural circuitry is still intact, but they've lost the camera in the front. So you just plumb it in. Exoskeletons for people who are paralyzed or have motor neuron disease. And stimulators. I mean, there's a group of spinal cord patients who have been, you know, they've been paraplegic for years, and now with stimulators in their brain, they can stand up, which may not sound like a lot, but for them, it's completely changed their life. You know, they've got better, you know, urinary function, they have better digestive function. So I think there's going to be a lot of electronics in the brain, and I think you are going to get enhancement. How it's going to work, we don't really know yet. We still don't know a lot about the brain. We're learning. I mean, Eddie's types of studies are just revolutionizing what we know about how the brain actually works.
Maybe not just electronics, but could we actually put more neural cells in there? Normal, could we grow our own stem cells and suddenly put more brains in the brain cells in the skull?
Well, the problem is you've only got a certain amount of space. So, you know, you got a space constraint, unless you're going to make the head bigger. Which I'm not sure I really want to see people with larger heads. But, you know, that's the big problem is, you know, the things are already packed. And so unless you're going to take some old ones out and put some new ones in.
Question over here.
Janina Bass. The question is probably for Murray, but there is also a biological aspect to it and a philosophical one. We've been talking about superintelligence, AI, that's mechanistic, and common sense. But surely the thing that Elon Musk and everybody else is worried about is actually having something with a common sense and ability, but most importantly, a self-interested identity of even a mouse, because that what could potentially become dangerous. Without that self-identity and purpose, which is what AGI has, then you can create machines, they can be threatening, but you can still find potentially at least fire breaks. It's when that identity and self-interest comes in. How can you see putting a fire break on that? Because we won't know when that'll happen and how.
Okay, so this is where it's important, I think, not to anthropomorphize the AI too much, because the kind of AI that they're interested in or that they're concerned about, you know, it isn't necessarily like that. It doesn't necessarily have this sort of sense of its own purpose, or the kind of thing that we all take for granted in what makes us human and so on. It's just a blind optimizer that just wants to optimize some function or achieve some goal, the one that we've given to it, and it just is extremely good at doing that. However, according to their argument, when you look at the details of their argument, that there are certain what they call convergent instrumental goals, so that any goal that you give this very intelligent AI, there are going to be some sub-goals that it's going to have to achieve. And one of those will be self-preservation as a kind of side effect, not because it's like an animal or a human and cares about its own existence, but simply because in order to achieve whatever goal that we've given it, it has to preserve itself. If it gets destroyed, then it's not going to be able to achieve the goal that we've given it or optimize the function that we've given it. So according to their argument, you sort of get the same kind of thing of this tendency for self-preservation, which is potentially dangerous, but for somewhat different reasons. So then the question becomes, you know, how can we make sure that we give it the right goal in the first place? That's really, I think, the researchers who have thought about this most, and it's called the value loading problem, they call it. So how can we give it the right set of values that are implicit in the goal that we give it, that it doesn't do something that just violates our deepest values in trying to achieve, as a side effect, trying to achieve the thing we asked it to do.
And it's an interesting problem because we don't fully understand what good values are. Remember Heracles at the crossroads. What is the good life? What is the right moral system? The philosophy departments around the world have been working for 2,000 years on it, and we're making very slow progress. And the programmers might want to know, so what do I actually put into the morality kernel tomorrow? Now, the problem is you need something that can learn, ideally from humans, and can figure out what we are getting right, and maybe also notice what we totally get wrong. But figuring out how to do that in a stable way that is unlikely to go off the rails, that is an entirely new area. I'm very happy to be at an institute where we actually have philosophers and programmers who fill the whiteboard together with very weird the diagrams and equations, trying to figure out each other and what they could actually be putting into the software. So that takes a lot of research.
One more question down here.
Hello. Yeah, hi. So it's about the AI thing, and you mentioned those movies at the beginning, and I've seen all of them, and actually I like Her the best. But the thing about Avengers was I thought that the AI came about by accident. And I'm thinking now, like, making life is quite a difficult thing. It's hard for humans to do it just with basic inputs. But Mother Nature did it with enough time and iterations. And I'm just wondering if at the moment, with these different strands of AI, so computer vision, machine learning, other elements, language recognition, if there's enough basic inputs, and given the sort of size and scale of server farms that these big companies use, is that the right sort of environment to sort of like be a parallel for a primordial soup where just the right things come together at the right time and life springs? And could that happen in this kind of cyber environment?
Yeah, okay, so that's a great question, because when I was talking about obstacles towards human-level AI, I am assuming that that you need to make these conceptual breakthroughs in order to get there. And maybe I'll be surprised here as well. Maybe it'll turn out that if you build enough of these little small aspects, facets of intelligence, little bits of specialist intelligence, you make them good enough, as in really, really very, very good, and put them all together, that will be enough to make something that looks very much like human-level AI. So I think that's the kind of thing that you're alluding to there. I don't rule anything out these days, to be honest. I've been in AI for several decades now, and I'm pretty well acquainted with what happened even before I got into it. And I've been surprised so many times that now I don't make pronouncements about what will and won't happen. And so just maybe that's what will happen. It will be a conglomeration of bits that will be put together in the right way, and that will achieve it. Possibly. I doubt it, but it's possible.
Question here.
Hi. My original question was sort of answered, so I have a replacement question, which is this. Do the three panelists envisage a time in the near future where you'll be in the same room talking about the singularity, and will you be scared or excited? Will you be scared or excited?
Anders, you first.
Well,
think about that one.
Yeah. I even written about the technological singularity because people use the word in very, very different ways. I think intelligence explosion is probably the most important one, but people also use it to denote, okay, we have rapidly accelerating technology so fast that maybe we cannot possibly even predict what's going to be on the other side. There are also these ideas that, well, we might actually undergo big phase transitions in our civilization as we get enough power or computation or something else. I think in the future, as we get closer, if something like that were to happen, we would probably be using different words. We would not call it the singularity, just like people during the Second World War did not call it the Second World War. It was just all around them. So if we're sitting at the panel kind of 10 minutes from the singularity and talking about it, we would just call it the current situation. And I think if we weren't scared of a rapid phase transformation of humanity, I think that would be pretty stupid of us. However, I think we can also set up things in motion, even right now, that move us in a more safe direction, that actually set up safeguards and fire breaks for certain dangerous technologies and the kind of encouragement for useful, health-giving and safety-increasing technologies. That's my answer.
So I use the term the technological singularity really to mean the time at which we will, if we do, manage to create human-level artificial intelligence. Because I take it for granted that is going to lead quite quickly to some kind of super intelligence, which will have a dramatic effect on society. Now, I don't know whether that's going to be good or bad. But so I think it's really important that we work very hard to think through this issue, to try and make sure that we are, maybe it'll happen within our lifetimes, right? I think you're probably a bit younger than me, so it might happen in your lifetime, not in mine. But maybe it'll happen within our lifetimes, and I very much hope that we'll be able to sit here saying that it's an exciting thing, and not a bad thing. But I think we have to work hard and think hard to make sure that is what happens.
If I can add just one bit from biology, so one of the things that's happening here in Europe is basically we are trying to take sections of brain and put them into computers. So there's a group mostly working from Switzerland, but it's a big European consortium where slice by slice, they are basically counting all the neurons, identifying using stains, all the neurons, all the synapses, counting everything, and then modeling that in a computer. And the idea is to basically model the human brain in a computer. And who knows what that's going to be, right? A lot of people think the project is just absolutely asinine and unlikely to lead to anything other than spending billions of dollars on this. On the other hand, who knows?
So my answer is we must be both frightened and very excited by this singularity. We should be frightened because it's so much unpredictable. But the excitement is that this intelligence, if it ever comes about, could solve all kinds of deep problems which are currently holding us back. So all the unsolved diseases, Alzheimer's, cancers, which are still unsolved, probably could be solved by this factor of 1,000 times greater intelligence. And so that's something I look forward to.
You just reminded me that I forgot to plug my book, which is really the answer to your question. So on my very last slide was the cover of my new book, which is called The Technological Singularity, and is the answer to your
Read it, it's good.
Yeah. Is it question down there? Yes?
Yeah, hi. I think Anders articulated a kind of general fear that we all have, which is that this thing is just going to materialize. And many of the questions that have been asked suggest that we're going to wake up one day and, it's going to be there. And obviously that doesn't really happen. If you look at the timeline, this is the kind of thing that's articulated in Ex Machina as well, which I thought was a great film. On the timeline, though, you just see this big jump. Obviously, I'm asking you to speculate, and anyone on the panel, what do you think could happen in, say, our lifetime, in 2050? What kind of discussion might we be having? What kind of scenario might we be in where we're talking about this thing being achievable?
So one trick when thinking forward is, of course, to go backward, kind of thinking, okay, what about 50 years ago? What would our conversation have been about back then? What would those predictions have been wrong about, and so on? And it turns out that when you look at, for example, 60s predictions about the year 2000, some of the best ones actually understood the power of networked computers rather well. They had no clue what the internet would be about, but they could see it was a big thing already. And I think this is true for what we have been discussing too. Artificial intelligence, our new synthetic biology, various new forms of decision making, they are going to be big things. But in 2050, we will, of course, be all laughing about the silly ideas we had in 2015, because synthetic biology has, of course, gone off in a different direction and might be solved in very different ways. We might actually have found that, actually a small, simple artificial intelligence actually solve the hard problem. We don't need superintelligence for that. That's a separate issue. It might turn out that, actually it's all prediction markets. We're all gambling on every political decision rather than trying to achieve consensus. It's very hard to tell what it is, but I think we're roughly on what is likely to be big in 2050.
Of course, it might be just the AIs that are looking back and saying, what a bunch of stupid predictions those biological creatures made.
Carbon forms.
I think the point is to have interim steps in between. So rather than just suddenly we're being surprised by something, we decide in advance some canary signals. So we say, well, this is unlikely to happen, but if it did happen, then it's a step that things are changing. So if the computer vision improves further, if there are some signs of common sense, if there are some signs of creativity, if there are some signs of computers being able to form abstract concepts, then this will help us to change. On the other hand, then we might get a realization of there are deeper problems than we've seen before. So we should be monitoring on a regular basis, I say once every 3 months. Organizations should be reflecting back on what their roadmap is and changing how things are. So that lessens the chance that we'd be deeply surprised.
I think it's actually an important role of a futurist community to be as an observatory of these things. The same goes, of course, for biomedical progress. On one hand, awesome things are happening all the time in the lab, but translational science moving it into the clinic, oh, that's a horrible, slow process that takes a lot of money and quite often fails, even if the thing in the lab is awesome and perfect. Understanding when certain things have managed to migrate sufficiently close to being widely used, that is quite essential.
Yeah, because I mean, two things. One is there's no regulation around synthetic biology.
Yet.
You know, and I mean, you know, anybody with a high school degree and a basic understanding of molecular biology and has access to things like Ebola, SARS, you could make a super virus in an afternoon just by stitching together various genes that, you know, are pathogenic. But, you know, there's no regulation currently anywhere in the US or in Europe around what you can and cannot do in synthetic biology. And then secondly, there's a new technology called gene editing called CRISPR, which allows one to, for example, if you had an embryo that had a Huntington's mutation that would cause Huntington, or if you had an embryo that had a thalassemia mutation, you can go in and you can site-specifically splice that out and put in the appropriate normal gene, okay? Now people are talking about, well, what if you then implanted that and it turned into a baby? That mutation or lack of mutation is now in their either testes or in their ovaries, and how do you know that you haven't modified the genome in some other way? So there's this huge discussion now in the scientific community about whether or not we should use gene editing in humans. And again, there's no overt restriction on this, but there's a hell of a lot of discussion about it. And you know, basically the big funding agencies are saying, oh my God, you know, and this didn't exist a year and a half ago.
CRISPR's come along very quickly.
It has.
Even surprised the people who are involved in it.
Very fast. It's probably next to stem cells and regenerative medicine the hottest thing in science, because, you know, now you have the ability to modify the human genome in a way that nobody had ever anticipated.
So we must be almost out of time. Maybe 5 more minutes. Yes, down there. Question?
Hi, I'm Lizzie. Question for Andres, please. I'm a data strategist, and I work with a lot of people trying to kind of implement evidence-based decision-making in businesses. And my question is more about the obstacle of people who are not that way inclined already. Their whole world is not evidence-based. They are very comfortable and happy without any evidence or any data or any challenging of what feels comfortable to them. In your experience, how could you approach sort of the majority of the population not being evidence-based, apart from kind of education from an early age? So we're kind of stuck with a lot of adults who are not like that.
Yeah, it's true. It's actually worth recognizing that using evidence to base decisions on is actually a relatively rare and modern phenomenon. Evidence-based medicine, people start talking about it in the 60s and early 70s. It's that old. Yes, we had scientific medicine for a longer while, but actually doing this really strict testing is a very new phenomenon. And it's hard because it goes against what most people do. Normally we try a few things and then we think we have gotten enough evidence that way. I think the way of doing it is to demonstrate it in the small, in an innocuous, nice application that doesn't threaten anybody, because it's not about anybody's vested interest in the organization. It might be what color should we have in the hallways, or what makes people, which color makes people happiest. Google is infamous for having tried out 41 shades of blue on some website, and one of the chief designers quit in anger because that's kind of just against everything good design is about. You can't just do statistics to figure out a good web color. It turned out that it worked really well with the web color we used, and apparently we made money from increased traffic. So the idea is try to find something fairly innocuous to start with to show the power of adding evidence. Sometimes you can, of course, try I told you so, showing that, yeah, we have a few choices and afterwards measure what happens. But it's going to take a while. It's a very social thing. It's not so much about statistical power as actually convincing people that, yeah, it makes sense to be trying to be rational about it. If we like our company or our organization and its goals, we should be better at achieving them.
The resistance inside the medical community to the notion of evidence-based medicine is quite shocking. And Archie Cochrane, who pioneered it, had all kinds of people who were opposing him. This is actually covered quite well in the book by Philip Tetlock that Anders mentioned. His most recent book is Super Forecasting, when he advocates an evidence-based approach to politics and an evidence-based approach to all kinds of other things. And he refers back to the struggles inside medicine, in which doctors were horrified to think that their intuition might have to be put to the test against clinical-based trials. Nowadays we take it for granted, but there was a big change in mind that needed to take place. We just need to pursue that and make sure people understand that history, and then they can, by analogy, they can understand how it might work elsewhere too.
Hopefully.
Question over there?
Yep. Hi. My question is about artificial intelligence and what might be the human response to artificial intelligence or super intelligence, and to explore a bit whether you see humans remaining at a constant, or explore a bit what the human development could be. But before going into that exploration, just to step back and do you regard you dissected what some components of human intelligence, and do you regard intuitive faculties as components of human intelligence? And if yes, then do you see AI or super intelligence being able to mimic that, or do you see that as a source of continuing human competitive advantage against more machinistic AI, super AI, if it was developed beyond that latent capacity?
So will we humans actually be the super intelligence ourselves? Will we merge with technology and keep ahead of whatever these pesky robots might be doing to us?
Right, so that was the first part of the question, and so certainly if you read Kurzweil, then and many other commentators, then they are very keen on us keeping up with the machines, and so that's obviously one thing that we could do. This you already mentioned the possibility of cognitive prostheses of various sorts, so that would be one way of keeping up with the machines, or indeed the machines themselves are a kind of cognitive prosthetic, although they might not be installed in our heads. So it might be a more kind of symbiotic relationship that we have. This is all thinking speculatively ahead. And maybe Anders might want to comment more about that in a second. But can I just say one thing about the intuition? I'm not quite sure exactly what you meant by that, because it's a slightly very it could mean different things to different people. But I certainly see that as in humans a vital part of the creative process is the ability to have this aha moment when you realise that something is a good idea or a good solution to a problem that you didn't see, and that I think is actually one of the things that's very difficult to replicate on computers, and one of the reasons why I think we're struggling with this right now. I absolutely think it's possible, but I just don't think that we've figured out how to do it yet.
So Anders, can we keep ahead of the robots? Can we augment the brain as fast as software can augment itself?
Not really. In the end, biology, for all its awesome power, is kind of limited by being biology, while technology can be almost anything, including, of course, biology. So in the really long run, we will probably go outside biology. So I think we might want to find ways of embedding ourselves. In every cell there are mitochondria, and they're originally prokaryotic bacteria that moved into our ancestral cells way back. They're essential for us. We need them. And they, of course, cannot survive without us. I think, ideally, we should be the mitochondria of whatever superintelligences and technology evolves. Essential, but not necessarily having to do all the hard work.
You happy to continue, Chris? Yeah. Last question, then.
One more.
Yep.
Okay, so maybe a nice last question for the entire panel, then. Within your fields, in each individually, what would be over the next 5 years, what would be the one advance in your fields which would surprise even you and make you go, wow, we've made some tremendous leaps here?
What are the things that would impress and surprise even us in our fields?
Okay, well, I guess so there was this previous. Was it Callum actually asked about Jeff Hinton? So I think I think if Jeff Hinton's, that wasn't 5 years, but 10 years, but I think if we did crack common sense, then that would certainly impress me within AI. And yeah, and creativity. I think the previous questioner, I think, really talking about intuition, did hit upon what I think is actually something very important. Is that sort of aha moment of insight that we humans get when we see an unexpected solution to a problem comes out of nowhere. And if we could build that into computers, I think that then we would be a long way to cracking the creativity problem. So if we were to replicate the way brains do that, for example, might be one way of doing it. So that would impress me.
So I would be really impressed and surprised if we could make designer online problem-solving communities. Today, sometimes alternate reality games get people interested in solving problems, and you get these spontaneous groups that are amazingly good at solving very, very difficult tasks. People just join them spontaneously. They organize themselves in rational ways that they figure out on their own. And you get these groups that if you were to try to hire them as consultants, you would say, that's an amazingly valuable consultancy. If we could only get one. Now they just emerge for free online because it's an interesting game. What if we could develop a kind of technology of creating this interested crowdsourcing to solve problems as efficiently as we see that they sometimes do online? That, I think, would totally change the world. I don't think there is a general science for it, but I might be wrong.
It has been done, by the way. There was a TED talk about it, but I don't remember the name right now.
Yeah, but I doubt it's a reliable method.
Stevie?
You know, it's almost impossible to predict because, you know, I don't know what these guys think, but the field of biomedicine and in biology is just zooming. You know, it's as a guy who spends 12 hours a day sitting and reading, I find it almost impossible to keep up. You would not have predicted immunotherapy would be as successful as it's been 5 years ago. You would not have predicted the ability to basically go into the brain using electronics and actually restoring function in patients to a limited extent at the moment, but in a way that's never been done before. I think if immunotherapy can address solid tumors, it will basically put the small molecule pharma business out of business because it's just so transformative. But it's almost impossible to predict. You know, 10 years ago, people still talked about junk DNA and everything was DNA. Junk DNA is not DNA, it's RNA. And RNA is now more important than DNA. Nobody would have predicted that. So it's just, you know, you could almost pull anything out of the air and say it might be possible.
So nothing would surprise you?
No, I get surprised all the time. That's the funny thing. But you know, there's just parts of science that just didn't exist 5 years ago, and you just go, wow, where did that come from?
So something I'm not expecting to happen in 5 years, but might just take place, is real breakthroughs with quantum computing. You know, there are companies such as D-Wave and others who are making very strong claims with various venture capitalists backing them. That could allow all kinds of new problems to be solved more dramatically than before. Secondly, I look forward to something dramatic happening with this incredible word blockchain, that we're not quite sure what it will do. We can see some simple ways in which it might transform organizations, but could it actually in some sense allow a phase change in how we do decentralized things? Some real applications, killer apps as opposed to some nice. That's the second thing. And third, I live in some hope that some of these smart drugs might actually work more effectively than before, that it will allow us to have a higher state of consciousness without any kind of side effects, possibly not just making us smarter, but also making us more human in the sense of being kinder, more collaborative, freer from our more destructive tendencies. Possibly then we could give it to all the politicians and our corporate leaders, and we'd get round some of the things which are holding us back. So these are three things I don't particularly expect within 5 years, but I'll be positively impressed if they do take place. So Chris, final words from you.
So, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to the panel. Fantastic thoughts and visions, and we have some hot food outside, drinks, so please continue the conversations. Thank you for all coming, and have a good weekend, everyone. Thank you.